Hi, I'm Deb with Snapjaw, and today we're going to be going through magnet installation, cleanup, all that stuff. A lot of the time we offer these kits like pre-installed, but if you've got an existing hood and you wanted to do the installation yourself, we do offer the Mohawk in a pre-assembled sort of form. So the first thing you'll notice is we've got a pile of magnets here. These are very strong magnets. You want to be a little bit careful when you're handling them. They can sort of snap together and pinch, and they can also snap together and sort of crack themselves. So I usually throw in 1 or 2 extra magnets. The first thing we're going to note is that we've got enough magnets to go both in here and here. It's going to be a total of 12 magnets. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And we don't have any sort of predefined sort of holes for up here. I've started this a little bit. I'll discuss how we go about lining that up. The first thing is you'll want to get the magnets in the Mohawk first. This is the easiest sort of way to do it. If you try and put the magnets in here without them being in the Mohawk, they may not line up quite right. The next thing I want to mention, it's super important, is that the magnets all have to be aligned the same way. You'll notice that the magnets here hold. If you imagine this being the Mohawk, pinching the Mohawk like that, the magnets should always align like this. So as you're putting them in, always make sure that the alignment is correct, or you will have to remove the magnets and sort of realign them. It's not too bad if you get it messed up, but it's better to do it right the first time. So what we want to do is we want to start by finding these little tabs down here. You can put one magnet here, and this is why we want to do the magnets in the Mohawk first, because you have enough magnets that you can actually attach them like this. The nice thing is that this magnet here will hold the magnet inside of the Mohawk in exactly the right place where you need it to be. But we're only going to focus on 1/2 of this at a time. And the reason for that is because when you're dealing with magnets on both sides, they'll have a tendency to want to sort of clap together like that. And it's not so bad if you don't have a bunch of wet latex, but as soon as you start introducing wet latex to the mix, it becomes a lot more difficult. Once we do end up having the magnets on this side, here, and here all installed, what you want to do is put some sort of spacer in. You can just fold up like cloth more than this, or use some of the bubble wrap that we ship these things out with. We actually should have some bubble wrap stuffed in here. You can just leave the bubble wrap in if it's not getting in the way, or just cut a smaller amount of that to keep the Mohawk pushed open while you're doing the installation. But let me just go ahead and set the Mohawk magnets up. So that's the first one in place. Next thing I want to do is make sure that this pulls together, and it does. And you'll notice I don't clip it around, just a second, that if you put it in wrong, it'll push. So you want to make sure that it's not pushing, it's pulling. So I'm going to make sure that that's aligned the exact same direction. So all the magnets have the poles facing the same direction. And we'll just go ahead and put in one right here too. So again, just making sure that the poles align up properly. There we go. That's okay if there's 2 of them right there. And you can sort of double check your work as you're going. Once you've got like a few of these in, if you're just not quite sure, because it's really easy to accidentally flip them around, you just test it against all of them, and sure enough, it's doing just fine. If you've got too much material here, you may need to use the micro cutters to clip, but actually this should be okay. Let me just double check that direction. Gently pop one of these off. There. Okay. So, with the magnets in like this, what I'm going to do next is take some of this black latex, and we are just going to go ahead. I've got some water. It's good to keep some water. Wet the brush tip a little bit. Dab excess water over there. Now you got to keep in mind that this brush will probably not survive this journey, so by the end of this you may need to dispose of the brush, so use just cheapy brushes. Just dip it in latex, and what I'm just doing here is ensuring that we just do like one solid layer, just like this. This one layer is not enough to make sure that your magnet won't come out. This is just to start us off. We're actually going to need to do 3 or 4 layers on each magnet to ensure that the magnets are sturdy enough and well installed and don't come out easily. Because, as I mentioned before, they do have a tendency to clap together. So by the end of this process, you'll actually want enough latex sealing in the magnets that if you had to, you can slide the magnet off without ripping the latex. So that takes a significant amount. But that's 2 of them. With these ones, it may be a little harder to get a brush sort of in there. So just do your best. Going in a little blind with this first layer. Later on, what I'll do is once the first layer is dried, I'll stick my finger in there, see if I can feel any of the bare metal of the magnet. These magnets are extremely powerful, as I said before. They're neodymium N2 magnets, I believe. We get them from K&Y Magnets. And we'll provide a link to where we buy these, just in case. As I said, we'll try to include, I got a little bit of latex on there, but that's okay. We'll try to include enough magnets that if 1 or 2 of them crack, you should be okay. But you know, if you accidentally have the entire stack break or something like that, we don't really cover that. So I'll just provide a link where you could purchase more magnets if some of them fall out or if anything bad happens beyond that. So that said, that's our first layer, and we'll come back for the next. So with this part, basically I've already got half of the magnets in. You can see that they are embedded. I'm actually going to end up going over these a few more times, probably 3 or 4 more times still, just to make them extra chonky. They won't come out at all. The other side is not yet done, but before I do that, before I start getting these into a situation where they might clack together, I'm going to do a little bit of cleanup. The first thing to mention is on this side you can see it's pretty much the right color, but there's little tiny bits from the previous color. You can tell we did a red Mohawk beforehand. Also, it's never 100% perfect. Like there's the black, which is the inside color. You'll see that that's in some parts. And also you can see there's a couple parts that are maybe a little gibbly. This is okay. It's a very complicated mold. There are going to be bubbles. But I'm just going to talk briefly about this. So if you do actually have any like sort of mold release residue or anything like that, it's enough to just gently rub it with like an X-Acto blade or something like this. This will chunk off most of it. This will get the rest of it to at least a state where the latex will adhere really well. And I'm just going to do that on all the shiny parts here. You won't need to do it most likely if your whole mold comes out nicely, but I had just finished redoing with this. Once I'm done with that, I'm going to take the blue color here and I'm going to basically coat the entire thing again. I've already trimmed all of the excess here on the Mohawk. This I used micro cutters for and just spent the time going down each one of these like that. It's a little bit tedious, but that's totally necessary. Once you've clipped out all of that part, basically all that's left is to clean off any mold residue, and then, as I said, we're going to be doing this, but I'll take another video of that once I begin. All right, so here we are. I've actually scraped off all of the plastic sort of mold coating that I pointed out. Just used the razor blade and kept it horizontal to the surface, and then wiped it off with a damp cloth. Right now you can see it looks good on both sides. I've actually already started doing a little tiny bit of coverage, so you can sort of see the difference. This is before, this is after, this is just one coat. And I've also already started to coat some of the tips here. But I'm gonna go ahead and explain how to do that and show how to do that really quick. So just painting, I'll start with this. Now you will wanna do the tips and focus on those primarily, but I'm gonna show you both of these at the same time. Basically what you want to do is just get a little bit of paint on your brush like that. You want to make sure that your brush is slightly damp, and you can dab it on a cloth as well, just to make sure that you don't have too much. And you just want to like move quickly. You don't have to move super quickly, but you do want to make sure that your brush is never dry, or else you'll start to get sort of chunky bits of streaks of latex. And the idea here is you don't want to allow too much latex thickness to build up. The shape is already there, so you're not really trying to build up any extra thickness. You're really just trying to coat any of these black areas that show through from the inside out, or as you notice, some of these like little red areas. This is from the previous color. So I'm just gonna go over here, and you just sort of get the idea there. Let me just get one more of these done, and we'll move on to the tips. Okay, so that's the basic idea, super simple. It's all about just sort of keeping a thin, even layer, feathering the edges. You notice I'm not allowing like any sort of hard lines to sort of show up. Now let's go to fixing up tips. This tip here, you can see, has a clear bubble. And what we're going to do is basically just get a larger amount of latex paint, and we're just gonna gently fill that bubble in. You wanna make sure you sort of poke it in there, just so that there's no air sort of trapped in between. You can build it up. You don't have to do all of the build up in one shot. And the idea is basically to coat and sort of re-add and reintroduce some of the shape back into that. Notice that there's a little tiny bit of a clip right there. I'm just gonna grab a small bit of latex, just dab that on gently. And once that's in place, which it is, I'm going to go ahead and just wet my brush, rinse it mostly off, dry it off just a little bit. And then at this point, what we can do is basically gently feather up this way and down this way. And you can see that we can basically eliminate some of those hard lines if you notice that there's any sort of bubbles or imperfections on the individual strands of hair. So a combination of, on the smooth parts, just a light wash going over to clarify that and basically make the whole surface the same color. And then very focused build up. You'll notice I didn't actually touch the part that I dabbed there. This part, I'm just gonna let that dry. Any excess here, once this has dried, I'll go ahead and clip and then just do another layer. I'll do as many layers as is required to sort of build that up to a nice point, just like these ones. So here we have the Mohawk, as you can see. I've gone ahead and basically filled in all of the sorts of holes, built up a few of these things. I'm gonna build up that one just a little bit more to give it a slight upturn, but that's just gonna be a couple more layers. And yeah, basically when you're working on these, just keep in mind it's hair. The mold itself may come with a few bubbles when you get yours. It's an unfinished one, I mean, that's what we're doing with the magnet install. It doesn't have to be perfect to look amazing. So don't stress or beat yourself up too much. If you notice there's a couple sort of ends that are not like perfectly sharp, the whole thing together will work out and should end up looking like hair. So I just wanted to give like a quick update video on this before we go straight back into magnet installation. All right, so here we go, on to the next part of the magnets. Now, I didn't actually connect these ones in as well as I would like to, but I'll show you a good fix for that. With that said, what we're gonna do is start to position this in a moment. So I'm just gonna put these guys here, this here, far enough that they're not gonna slap together or anything. So we've got a non-conductive instrument, and I'm going to use this to basically scoop a little bit of latex down into there. You'll notice that I had actually tapped it with a brush earlier. That didn't quite do the trick. It got like the front half of it working just fine. But we're just gonna go ahead and grab just a bit of latex here And without dripping too much of it, what I'm gonna do is just basically pour that right in there. I'll just do a little bit more. You don't need too much, just a bit. And what we're gonna do is actually do something called slush casting, kind of. It's very similar, but the idea is basically that now that we've poured a bit of that in there, I'm just gonna go ahead and turn the Mohawk like this and just trust that gravity is doing all the work for me.
Slash casting is basically when you have a liquid material and you basically just rotate the object around so that the material inside coats whatever you're wanting it to coat.
Yep, exactly. Now, normally when you're slush casting something, the casting part of it is that, you know, you're putting it into a mold and then you'll eventually pull it out of the mold. In this case, it's really just the slushing, and we're not actually gonna be taking it out. It's gonna be used to basically seal that in there. That should be good. Now I'm going to do the same exact process on this side with this magnet. And again, I'm just using that second magnet that's already kind of, oh, there we go. We got a drip coming out. That's how you know it's working. You want to try and avoid dripping directly on the Mohawk. I'm just going to hold this end forward that way a little bit so that if it does drip, it drips onto the table instead of.
And this is latex, basically rubber, so don't worry about it dripping on a hard surface. Once it dries, you can just peel it off.
Exactly, and actually if it were to drip on itself and I was quick, I could use water to wipe it down. If you're not quick, then you can actually just either clip it off if it's too big and then paint over it, or just paint directly over it if it's just a really small drip. And so you're gonna do one more little bit here. There's plenty of latex, and maybe more than enough, but yeah, there we go. But with that said, I really do want to just sort of like do this a once and done sort of situation on the insides of these, and just sort of like leave it like that. You can see the casualties of war here. You want to make sure that you're doing this over a surface that's glass or tabletop that you don't.
Honestly, you could do it on like a hard. We do it. Like, we have linoleum flooring, and you can do it on that, and we'll just peel it up after.
Yep, exactly. So you can see that I've actually got like a little bit of a drip here. I can actually apply a bit of water to my brush and just gently do this. It's on the underside here. What I'll end up doing is just painting over this with blue, but I'm just making sure that it doesn't stick up, like doesn't create a big dollop basically. And that's basically that for the drips. I'm going to let this go for a minute. I'm gonna basically put this on some plastic wrap and on like a little tiny head form. You could just even like lean it up against something like so. Let it just sort of dry like that for maybe 15-20 minutes, and after that we'll apply the last two magnets on here, and then the final bit, what we're gonna do is just basically line that up on the head, and I'll show you how to do that application on the mask itself. That's it. All right, so basically we've got the Mohawk completely finished. All of the magnets are embedded. They're pretty sturdy in there. I'll probably do like one or two final sort of like touch up layers on the insides, but all of the magnets are well attached. One thing you'll notice is that I've actually got 3 magnets on right now. This is actually the back half here. That'll become apparent why I'm doing that in a moment. But I normally start with the front half. So whenever I'm doing anything with the back half, just imagine that we're doing that. But I want to show you currently what we've got going on here, because I've actually already started the front half, just to sort of show you. This is a relatively well hidden one. This is after around 2 layers. You can see like we still need to do a little bit of cleanup. That's just a couple more layers of latex over that. And then this one right here, this is kind of how it looks once you've actually sort of clipped the hole out. But what I'm going to be doing is showing you how we actually sort of position everything. So taking the Mohawk like this, and keeping in mind, of course, you're gonna have the magnets on the front half. I'm not, because I've already got those ones cut. But what you're gonna do is place the Mohawk on, roughly positioned like this. You wanna make sure that the front doesn't come down like right between the eyebrows. That would look a little bit weird. You also don't wanna go down too far down the back, just because of the nature of the zipper. we do want to have like most of the anchoring happening kind of on the top. So this is how the Mohawk will sit. There isn't a perfect exact position for this, and it will vary depending on hood design, so don't stress it too much. Now, with that said, what we're going to do, and keeping in mind you'll be starting with the front, so I've already got that part done. We're gonna do this on the back together. So the first thing I'm gonna do is just make absolutely sure that this is sitting roughly center. So I'm lining this up. This looks about right from the front. This looks about right from the back. And then the other thing I want to point out is that this one here, the back one, has a magnet that's got to sit to either the left or the right of the zipper. So it's okay if it tilts ever so slightly, you won't really notice it, but that magnet can't be sunk right where the zipper is. You're going to want to put it just adjacent to that. So yeah, without any further ado, you're going to need a pin or some sort of sharp tip, because this is how we're going to mark it. So I've made sure that the position is about where I want it. Now what I'm going to do is, taking that pin, I'm going to gently trace the magnet. And this will help me get a sense for where it is. Now you want to make sure that your Mohawk doesn't shift. Go to the other side, find that magnet, and then you're going to want to trace that too. And this is the exact same process on the front as it is on the back. I usually like to do it with the front, sink these magnets in, then attach the Mohawk to those magnets, or at least a couple of them, and then move to the back only after several layers here so that these magnets don't pop out. So that's those two. And then the final one here, which I will just make a quick mark. The key is to know where the start and end and roughly where the middle of the magnet is. So I've gone ahead and marked those. Now, one thing to be aware of is, prior to these being 100% sunk in, you do have to be a little gentle and a little careful about sort of how you're removing and adding these magnets in. You can actually slide the Mohawk off, and sliding the Mohawk off will do less wear and tear on the hood. It'll otherwise sort of pull up. And if you haven't got all of the layers on just yet, that pulling up can actually undo some of the work. That's actually what happened to this magnet here, and I had to reinsert it. Totally not a big deal, but you can sort of save yourself some hassle. So you can see where the marks are. You can see that there's a sort of half moon center mark there, half moon mark there. What I'm going to do is grab one of the magnets that I've got attached to this. One other thing to be aware of when you've got magnets on here as well, working with 2 or 3 at a time is way easier. Working with 3 at a time when you're trying to do the markings is important, so you get consistently like where the left and rights are. But you don't want to have like all of the magnets on here at once, because they start to sort of clack together, like so. All right, so yeah, I guess with that said, what I'm going to do next is just place this down here, sketch the remainder all the way around. You'll notice I was only really able to get half of it sort of drawn on. And then here likewise. Doesn't have to be like precise down to the millimeter, but it should be pretty close. The magnets will still attach, and it will still act as an anchor provided there's a decent amount of overlap. But there we go. And then this one right here along the back. So this one, you'll notice with this, where it's right next to the zipper, what you want to do is position it so that there's still just a small amount of material just to the left of that. And it's okay if it's really close, but you don't want to cut all the way through to where the zipper is, because that'll just end up being a weak point for this magnet otherwise. So I'm just going to go around all of this. Now, that's about positioning. Same process on the front and on the back. You can see how I've got just a small amount of latex in between there and there. So I'm just going to double check before we commit to cutting. as they say, measure twice, cut once. So I'm just gonna go ahead and attach this like so. Position that where the holes are. Does this line up? And yes, it does seem to line up. Yeah, it's actually pretty good. So I was just making sure that these positions are correct. You'll notice that they're not 100% like next to each other. It's not a perfectly symmetrical magnet setup, but it's pretty close. I'm just drawing a little X marks the spot through these. And that'll help me because I like to start by cutting with my X-Acto blade. This is the next part. So I've got this little retractable X-Acto blade, but this will work with any hobby cutter. The nice thing about this is I can actually control the length of the blade a little bit and try and avoid cutting through the hood too much. You can see with this one here, I did actually get through the hood a little bit, but what we're gonna do is try to basically avoid that if we can. And I'll just show this with one of these, and then we can move on to the next part. This helps with new blades. Like this is a relatively new blade because it cuts through really quickly. Be extremely careful when you're cutting that you're not putting your finger here and cutting like that. You will get yourself. Try and keep your hands out of the direction of where the blade is going and keep that blade under close control. It's very dangerous to use a hobby cutter like this or a hobby knife on a surface that can take quite a bit of resistance and then very suddenly give way. That knife can go flying in no time, so you want to be really careful. All right, the next thing I'm going to do, this it's best done with actually two of these, but you don't need two of these. You could use tweezers if you want. I'm basically going to be using some of these as tweezers. The idea is that I'm going to lift up one of these chunks, and you can see I'm going to try and avoid cutting all the way through, and we'll just basically eliminate that chunk. Boop. One.
That was pretty clean.
Yeah, that's the goal. It doesn't always come out this way. It's okay if it doesn't. If you find that you've actually trimmed all the way through the hood, it's obviously not ideal. That's not what we're trying to do. But as you can see with this one here, this one where I did nick through a little bit, and depending on the thickness of your hood at various places, some of these holes may be easier to partially sink than others. It's okay if it goes all the way through. What we'll end up doing with that one is installing the magnet and then actually turning the hood inside out, not turning it inside out, but basically opening it up and then dabbing latex into repairing those holes. If you end up cutting all the way through, all the way around, there's nothing for the magnet to sit on, that requires a little bit more ingenuity. You'll actually need to use a flat strip of latex similar to the hair flap, and just position that along the top of the hood over any of the holes that you're having problems with, and just basically glue that in with copy decks and seal that in with RD407 latex, the type of latex that is made out of this mask. And basically, if you've got a flap like this, put it on the inside of the hood, smaller than this, just small enough to cover up the holes that you need. So you just trim some of this. We'll include extra flap material for you if you need to. And then you just basically glue it all the way around the hole, and then the magnets can sit on top of that. So that's what you do if you don't do this part as cleanly as this is going, and you find you're having a lot of difficulty. So never fear, you cannot mess this up. It's just a matter of if it's going to be a little bit extra work or not. So I'm just gonna keep sort of working on this. Won't take much longer. Okay, so this is kind of how it'll initially look. Now, the next thing I need to talk about is the polarity of the magnets. When I'm putting these in, it's so easy to like put it on here and be like, oh, okay, cool, it's on there, and then you flip it around the wrong way. The magnets should always be tested just to make sure, does this pull and does this attach to this? That's basically what you're checking. Whoop, there we go. So as long as they're going the right direction, you can see basically it pulls here, and then when I know that it pulls here, I just basically would imagine you just take that straight off and don't flip it around, and just place it directly in there. And that's actually pretty good. It's still sticking up a little bit more than I want it to, so I'm just going to trim a little bit more, and we'll call that good. But the way that you trim it is basically go with the hobby clippers. You sort of push in, and you can do a little bit of trimming like that. These ones actually have a little bit of a duller end to them, so I'll use these ones. There we go. And likewise here. Basically, every micrometer matters. Like every little tiny bit of latex that's in there impacts how flat and how deeply the magnet will sit. So taking out just like little bits of latex like this may not look like much, but if you've got any like little tiny flaps or imperfections that are sitting in there that may be causing your magnet to sit just like a little taller than it needs to be, it will impact the your ability to make the magnet sit nice and flush. So I'm gonna go around this a little bit more, and then I'm gonna just try it again. It pays to be patient with this step, get out enough material so that it looks good. Because the more the magnet sits out, the more difficult it'll be. That's pretty good. I'm gonna just trim a little tiny bit more towards this side, but you can see how flush that is. That's pretty good. And this isn't even so bad, honestly. I could just go with that, but because the hood has a little bit of extra thickness at the back here, I'm not afraid of cutting through all the way. I can afford to make these holes just a little bit deeper so that magnet's even easier to sit in there. And if you're using your fingers in there, just try not to clip your fingers. Really can't stress enough, like it's really easy to accidentally clip yourself in one way or another with either these micro cutters or with the hobby knife. So just be safe. There's just a little tiny bit more in here, and then I think I'm going to call it. And we'll go ahead and immediately start embedding that magnet. So, I've got that at a place where I'm pretty happy. Now when you're testing it, it doesn't really matter like so much which direction the magnet's sitting, obviously. Like, that works pretty good. But before you commit to applying any latex over it, that's where you really need to just sort of like absolutely be sure. So if it's this way, that's good. I'm going to just pull it directly off, no flipping it, and place it right in there. Now what I like to do is just one magnet at a time. If you try and work with this magnet and this magnet at the same time, you'll find they clap together, might destroy the magnets. If there's wet latex over either one of those holes, you're going to make a mess, and you're likely going to end up needing to use these to sort of trim off any excess latex once it's dried. You can try and wipe away any excess latex if something like that were to happen with a wet cloth, but you might also just end up making a bit of a mess. So it's really important when you're working with these, work with 1 or 2 magnets at a time, and only if the magnets are really far. Like I could work with these 2 magnets at the same time and coat both of those. That would work just fine. But for now, for the purposes of this video, I'm only going to work with just one, and I'm just going to show you how that works. So, got my brush, got a little bit of paper towel, I've got some water. This water is being used a little bit. That's okay. I'm going to slightly wet my brush. I'm going to dab my brush on the paper towel. You want your brush to be a bit moist, but not too wet. And then I'm just going to try and go over it, apply that latex. Don't have to do everything all at once. When you're applying it, I'm just going to dab my brush a little bit more because you can see it was dripping a bit.
Super thin, it doesn't matter. Just don't cover up your pre-sketch on that one.
Yeah, exactly. There we go. So this is this latex was a little thinner than I thought it would be. Not a big deal. Just gonna dab basically on a little bit. And like I said, we're not trying to do everything all at once. I'm just gonna make sure that there's no drips. Do a little bit of feathering at the edges. Make sure that you get out all of the parts that are trying to drip. Come along the top. If you see any big globs or anything like that, you want to just work with the wet latex. And I can still see where that other cut is, so that's fine. And the feathering doesn't have to be absolutely flawless at this stage because what we're just trying to do is put on a little bit of latex there. Notice that this bucket of latex is just a little too thin for me. Maybe that was watered down for the airbrush or something. So I'm actually just gonna move to this one.
Just do a big glob.
Yeah.
Like that, and then put a fan on it.
Yeah, exactly.
Because that's fine as is. Just let that dry.
Yep. I'm gonna rinse off my brush here so I can reuse that brush.
So you can see how big that glob is. You can always feather it as long as there's no egregious, like there's a little drip here. You can always just sometimes take it with your finger.
Yeah.
I already got it.
You got it. This is pretty good. You can see it's like dripping a little bit right there, but
it's not that big a deal because it's so thin.
Exactly.
But yeah, at this point, just grab a fan and let the fan do the rest of the work.
Yep, you let this dry and you still can't move on to the next one. We're gonna need to do 3 or 4 layers minimum before it gets to a thickness like this where you can start working with other magnets around it. And honestly, these ones here need a bit more layers too. So what you want to do is make absolutely sure you've got at least 3 or 4 layers on before you start working on the magnet directly adjacent to it, because otherwise they can clap together. So just keep that in mind. But that's basically the entire process. The idea here is to make this as seamless as you can. You can already tell this one's looking pretty good. I've got a little bit of work to do here just because this one actually did clap together when I was trying to make this video. We weren't able to use the footage for the front half, so unfortunately I don't have that, but it's not a big deal.
Yeah, we'll get back to you with all of them embedded and with them cleaned up, just so you can kind of see like what level, you know, to get to with getting them clean. They don't have to be perfect, but yeah, only so you can just see kind of the hints of them on top of the hood.
And that's it. Here we are continuing on our way. You'll notice that with this one I've actually cut out a little bit too large of a hole. And this is actually a good opportunity to sort of show you something you can do. Now, if I take this little tiny extra piece of latex out, I would just use one of the little tiny parts of the hole clippings, those little triangles. Anyway, if I don't have that in there, then this magnet will just flip and slap into that one, and it becomes basically impossible to put in. So if you find yourself in a similar situation, you just need to create a situation where you got a little tiny bit of friction there. Try to make sure it doesn't poke out too much, at least no more than the magnet does. And then this should hold it just enough that you can actually paint over that. So that's what I've done here, and hopefully that helps if you encounter a similar situation. All right, so here we go. As you can see, I've got another magnet right there. I've already put it in the right direction. This one only has about 1 layer on it. And I just kind of wanted to show briefly, it's really not terribly complicated how we want to sort of like build this up, but you just do it, usually takes like 3 or 4 layers to sort of like get it looking really nice. Or I'm just going to basically dab around and put excess latex intentionally, building it up right around that. It's a little bit more. Notice that it's a little bit globby, which is totally what we want at this stage. Just fully dab and commit. Now that it's like that, what you can do is just sort of gently feather the edges just a little bit. Gently feather the edges just a little bit around all the different directions. And this is not like just a once sort of process. I'm gonna dab my brush in some water and then basically dab it off here, back to here. And now that my brush is damp, I can do the final sort of like little bit of feathering. And with this, just like that, you can see we've just applied a little bit more. The goal is not to disrupt too much the latex that I've just put there. So I'm just trying to keep the top relatively flat and then just do the feathering on at the edge and just leave that slight pool that I originally sort of dabbed up at the top as much as possible. And it doesn't have to look perfect on the first shot. This one here you can see has like 2 or 3 layers. I'm gonna do a few more before it sort of gets there. This one on the back, I just have this sitting in there chilling for now. I'm gonna put a little bit on there and basically fill it up. It helps a little bit to take it off of the headstand or whatever you're holding it with and tilt it forward when you're doing this one here. But you can do usually sort of like one quick brush on layer like this. It's just a little harder if you have to pull on anything, but we'll go ahead and just put a little bit of latex on there to sort of solidify it at least a little bit. Try and get the latex to actually sit inside of that gap so that there isn't like a big pocket where it can sort of slosh around back and forth. The less room that the magnet can move inside of its little pouch, the better. Cool. That's basically it. I'm going to go ahead and complete the rest of the work on this, and then we'll show sort of like an after.